All right, let's dive into this Wicked thing. Everyone's buzzing about the movie adaptation, or at least Act 1 of it. We've got reviews piled up and all the basic film info.
Yeah, it's definitely generating some chatter.
You flagged this one, right? Curious about how everyone's saying the adaptation doesn't quite live up to this stage production.
It's interesting, it's not just about one movie. It's like Hollywood's having a tough time cracking the code on these stage-to-screen musicals. There's been a bunch lately.
Right, totally. Well, right away, there's the whole Elephant in the Emerald City situation.
Uh-oh, what's that?
This first film only covers Act 1.
Oh,
They're
right.
doing the two-part epic thing. But a lot of the reviews are saying it leaves you hanging, like, wait, that's it.
Interesting. Though some critics found it felt incomplete, but there's this one review, get this, called the movie overlong.
What? But they didn't even get to Act 2.
I know, right? It's like this weird paradox, too long but incomplete. How does that even work?
Maybe that points to something being off with the pacing. Like, ending on a cliffhanger
Hmm?
before Elphaba and Glinda's whole frenemy thing really kicks in. Maybe that's why it feels both stretched out and cut short.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of the big stuff from Act 2, like Elphaba realizing the wizard isn't who she thought, they need to set all that up really well in Act 1 for this two-part structure to work.
Exactly. It can't just be hitting the same old beats. It'd have to, like, hint at what's coming later, but do it in a way that makes sense for this movie, you know?
Totally, yeah. Make it feel like it's all part of the same story, even though it's split up.
So visuals,
Mm-hmm.
another thing people are arguing about. Some reviews are saying Oz looks kind of flat,
Mm-hmm.
not as magical as the stage version.
I can see that.
One review even said the sets were like Oz on Prozac.
Ouch. That's gotta hurt.
Right. But it does make you wonder, what makes stage magic work on film? I mean, think about Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
That movie had trouble with this too. Is it that stage sets are so big they look squished on screen? Or is it more about how movies do visuals differently? Like, less is more sometimes.
It's tough to say for sure, but I think it's less about everything looking BA and more that certain choices didn't work.
Okay, yeah, because then you've got other reviews praising things like the costumes and some of the set pieces.
Exactly. It's not that Wicked suddenly became boring to look at, but some decisions in the adaptation process didn't quite hit the mark visually.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe it's the colors they used, the lighting, how they filmed it, all adding to that flatness some people felt.
Right. Remember that review that mentioned all the close-ups? Maybe that made things feel cramped, especially in scenes where you're supposed to see how big and impressive Oz is.
Oh, interesting point. Let's talk music. Now, I love Wicked, but one critic called the score overrated.
Oh, no, they didn't.
They said, besides a couple of hit songs, it's not all that memorable.
Bold statement. That's sure to stir up some debate.
Right, but it does get you thinking, what makes a good musical score? Is it just catchy tunes, or is it more about how the music helps tell the story? Does it make you feel something about the characters?
Right. I mean, maybe this critic just felt like the score didn't do enough to deepen the emotional impact of the story.
So, like, is Wicked just riding on the coattails of defying gravity and popular?
Well, it's possible they felt the music wasn't effectively used in the film. For example, think about defying gravity on stage. It builds and builds to this huge soaring moment. If they didn't capture that feeling in the film through editing or how they filmed it, then maybe it loses its power.
Oh, I see, yeah. Okay, on to performances. One review loved Ariana Grande's energy, as Glinda called it fun.
Sounds about right for Glinda.
But another one criticized both her and Cynthia Erivo's vocals, saying they eat their syllables.
Eating syllables. That's a new one.
Right. And it seems like it bothered more than one reviewer. It's funny because you hear that a lot about stage actors on film.
Yeah, they're so used to projecting their voices for the whole theater. Sometimes it sounds unnatural on camera.
Maybe the director was trying to go for a more natural conversational style, but it didn't quite work. Tough balance to strike.
Totally. Think about a classic Glinda line, "It's good to see me, isn't it?" On stage, you need that big delivery to sell Glinda's personality. But on film, that same line whispered could be way more believable. But would it still feel like Glinda?
Good point. Okay, strap in. This is where things get really interesting. Some reviews are bummed they didn't use more of Gregory Maguire's book.
Ah, the original novel.
It's supposed to be way darker, more political than the musical, right?
Exactly. The Maguire novel goes deep on power, corruption, religious extremism, stuff that's barely in the musical.
Mhm.
Imagine Elphaba wrestling with those themes in the film.
Whoa.
It would have added so much to her character and the whole story.
Maybe that darkness wouldn't have gone over well with all the Wicked fans out there, though. But I see your point. Sticking just to the musical might feel kind of safe, given how much potential the book has.
Definitely makes you think about what matters most when you adapt something. Do you stick to the popular version or take a risk? Try something new.
And whose vision wins in the end.
Right, exactly. The director, the writer, the studio, they've all got their ideas about what the movie should be. It's a balancing act, being true to the original and making something new and exciting for the screen.
Okay, let's break down some specific things reviewers didn't like about the editing. Lots of talk about too many close-ups, too many cuts during the songs, and relying too much on montages.
Yeah.
One review even said the editing felt frantic, like they were trying to hide a weak plot.
Close-ups can be great, but too many, and it feels like the camera's in your face constantly. And all those cuts during musical numbers, that can totally kill the energy. Think about Dancing Through Life on stage. It's this big, fun group number. But if the film keeps cutting away to show people's faces or reactions, it ruins the flow.
Oh yeah, instead of feeling the music, you're just distracted.
Exactly. And then there's the whole montage thing. One review mentioned how Elphaba and Fiero's romance is basically just a quick montage. You don't see those feelings develop naturally.
So it's like they're just checking off plot points without letting anything breathe.
Yeah, almost like a shortcut to get to the next big thing. And if we connect that to the bigger picture, this focus on spectacle over telling a good story, it's everywhere in movies now. It's all flash and no substance.
Right, we're bombarded with images, but do we actually care about what's happening
Yeah.
to the characters?
That's the key. You can have amazing visuals, incredible music, but if the characters aren't compelling, if you don't care about them, then it just doesn't work.
Which leads us to another thing critics keep bringing up, the characters. Besides Elphaba, they're saying everyone else feels underdeveloped. Like, we're told who they are, not shown.
That's a huge distinction, right? And it makes you wonder, is that a problem with the Wicked musical itself, or did the movie mess it up?
Yeah, like, is it the source material or the adaptation?
The stage show does focus a lot on Elphaba, but you get glimpses of the other characters too, especially Glinda. They've got their own stuff going on.
So the question is, did the film use those moments to make those characters more interesting? Or did they just tell us who they are instead of showing us?
Exactly. That's the difference between a good adaptation and a missed opportunity.
Before we move on, there's one more thing we need to address. One review called out the film for what it called forced ethnic diversity.
That's always a tricky comment to unpack. It tends to focus more on a perceived agenda rather than the quality of the representation itself.
Right, especially with Wicked. The whole story is about prejudice and judging people based on how they look. So to criticize the film for diverse casting seems, well, kind of ironic.
Instead of getting caught up in labels like forced or organic diversity, maybe we should focus on how those diverse characters are actually portrayed. Are their stories handled well with depth and nuance, or are they just stereotypes?
So it's about how those choices serve the story, not just about who's on screen.
Exactly. And especially when you're adapting something, it's worth asking if changing the race or ethnicity of a character added something important to the story, or if it felt like a superficial change.
So what's the takeaway here? About this Wicked adaptation, we've got praise for the spectacles, the music, some of the acting, but also a lot of criticism about the pacing, the editing, and whether the characters really come alive.
It seems like they're struggling to capture that magic from the stage, and this isn't just a Wicked problem, it's something we're seeing with a lot of movie musicals these days.
Yeah, spectacle over substance, and often not really digging into what made the original story so great.
So as we wait for Act 2, what do you think, dear listener? What are you excited about, and what are you worried about? What worked for you and what didn't? It's funny, this whole Wicked thing really gets you thinking about movie musicals in general. Like, are they all about spectacle now over substance?
Yeah, good point. There's definitely been a ton of movie musicals lately, but not all of them work. Some capture the stage magic, others not so much. I mean, remember that Cats movie?
Oh, yeah. Not exactly a shining example.
And a lot of the things people are saying about Wicked, the editing choices, focusing on visuals instead of the characters, it's kind of similar to other adaptations that didn't quite hit the mark. Makes you wonder, are we losing something in the transition from stage to screen?
Yeah, maybe. There's definitely something to be said for the energy of live performance.
Speaking of things not quite working, let's go back to that overlong yet incomplete problem. The critic who pointed that out also mentioned something about the pacing feeling weird.
That's the thing. How can it be both? Too long and unfinished. Maybe it's not so much about how long the movie is, but more about how the story's told, especially since we're only getting Act 1 of a two-act musical.
Right, it's like trying to squeeze a whole gallon of story into a pint glass. Some scenes might feel dragged out, while others are rushed through.
What if, instead of that montage with Elphaba and Firo, we saw their whole romance play out, like actual scenes, letting their feelings develop naturally?
That's interesting.
Maybe that would have given the movie a stronger emotional core even without Act 2, and it would have added depth to both of them as characters.
And then the overlong criticism would make more sense. It's not that the whole movie's too long, just that certain parts drag because they're not serving the story.
Yeah, exactly. And the incomplete feeling might come from those crucial Act 2 setup moments, either missing completely or not being developed enough.
Okay, but even with pacing issues, some critics still loved the performances, especially Ariana Grande as Glinda. One even said she was perfectly cast.
Grande definitely brings a certain star quality to the role. She's known for her charisma and stage presence.
Yeah, but even those who liked her acknowledged the criticism about the vocals. That eating syllables comment seems to have stuck with people.
It's interesting how certain critiques just latch on, isn't it?
Maybe they were just really hungry for those roles.
Uh-huh. Well, jokes aside, it does bring up that whole thing about stage acting versus film acting.
Right, what works in a theater doesn't always translate to the screen.
Exactly. So, was it the director's choice? Maybe they wanted a more subdued style that ended up sounding muffled?
Maybe. Or maybe the actors themselves were trying to find that middle ground between stage projection and film subtlety and didn't quite nail it.
It's a tough balance to find, for sure. Not every stage actor can make that transition smoothly.
Let's talk about the source material. It's kind of surprising how many reviewers were disappointed that the adaptation didn't use more of Gregory Maguire's book. They specifically mentioned the political stuff and those darker themes.
Makes you wonder if they were playing it safe by sticking so close to the musical. The novel has a totally different vibe, way more complex issues. It's not just a fun fairy tale, it's a commentary on real-world stuff, like social injustice and how power corrupts.
Yeah, but would that have worked for a Wicked movie? The musical's so popular, and making it darker might have turned off a lot of fans.
That's true. The musical has a huge fan base, and a darker, more political version might have alienated them. But it's still a missed opportunity to explore those deeper layers, maybe even surprise people with a more mature take on Wicked.
I see what you mean. It's almost like they chose the safe route instead of taking a risk and trying something different.
Exactly. And it's not just about the tone or themes. The novel also gives you more to work with for those supporting characters. Remember how some critics said they felt flat and underdeveloped in the film?
Yeah.
Well, the book has way more background on characters like Fiyero, Nessarose, Madame Morrible, more about their motivations, their backstories, it's all there.
So maybe sticking to the musical's structure limited what they could do with those characters, even if they wanted to.
Yeah, kind of like they picked a lane and had to stay in it.
Right. It makes you realize how many decisions go into adapting something. It's not always about making the best artistic choice, but maybe the choice that fits the overall goal, whether that's making money, pleasing fans, or staying true to a certain vision.
There are a lot of competing priorities.
Okay, back to those editing critiques. Too many close-ups, all those quick cuts, the overuse of montages.
I can see how it'd get frustrating. Too many close-ups and you feel claustrophobic, especially in a story that's supposed to be visually grand, like Wicked. Imagine that scene when Elphaba gets to the Emerald City for the first time. On stage, it's this amazing spectacle. She's taking it all in. But if the movie just keeps showing close-ups of her face, you lose that sense of wonder.
Yeah, they're trying to force an emotional connection instead of letting you experience it naturally.
And all the cuts during songs can be jarring. It pulls you out of the moment. One review mentioned Defying Gravity specifically, how it felt choppy because of the editing. Imagine that iconic scene, Elphaba rising above the stage, belting out those high notes. If they keep cutting away from that, it loses its impact.
It's like they're trying to make a music video instead of letting the performance speak for itself.
And using montages to cram in a lot of story or emotions, that can feel like a cop-out. Right, exactly. Like with Elphaba's transformation, she goes from this awkward student to a powerful witch. That's a journey you want to see, not just have it summarized in a few quick shots.
It's a shame because the musical has these amazing moments that could have been incredible on screen if they'd just let them breathe.
Instead, it feels like they were more focused on hitting those familiar beats and showing off the spectacle rather than digging into the characters and how they connect with each other.
So what does all of this say about movie musicals today? Are we giving up depth and nuance for flash and the stuff we already know?
It's tough to say for sure. There's definitely a demand for the magic of stage musicals on the big screen. But there's also the risk of losing what makes them special. The storytelling, the characters, the emotions.
It makes you wonder if both the play and the book have so much potential. What would a truly successful Wicked adaptation look like?
Now that's a question worth pondering.
But before we wrap this up, we got to circle back to that forced ethnic diversity comment. Especially with Wicked, it's like, the story itself.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. You see that phrase a lot, and it usually says more about how people feel about representation in Hollywood than about the actual casting.
Right, exactly. And with Wicked, it's extra ironic, isn't it?
Totally. I mean, the whole point of the story is challenging how we judge people based on how they look, who's good and who's evil.
Exactly. So criticizing the movie for having a diverse cast is kind of missing the whole point.
Instead of getting caught up in whether the diversity is forced or whatever, maybe we should look at how those casting choices affect the storytelling. Did the actors bring something to their roles? Did their performances work?
Yeah, and did those choices actually make Oz feel more inclusive, more representative? Like, did it actually achieve what it was trying to do?
Right. It's not about checking boxes. It's about making the world of the story feel real. Like, it reflects how diverse our own world is.
Okay, so bigger picture now. What does all this talk about the Wicked movie tell us about movie musicals in general? What's going on with them these days?
Seems like everyone's trying to find that sweet spot. Staying true to these big stage productions, but also trying to do something new with them.
Maybe it's about figuring out how to make these classic stories connect with people today without losing what made them special in the first place.
And realizing that adapting something isn't just about copying it to a different format, but about reimagining it for a new audience.
Which brings us back to that big question. What would a really good Wicked adaptation look like?
Yeah.
If you could make it, what would you do, dear listener?
Imagine a Wicked movie that really leans into those political and social ideas from Maguire's book.
Ooh, yeah.
A film that digs even deeper into Elphaba and Glinda's friendship, all the ups and downs. A version of Oz that's visually amazing A&E, makes you feel something.
A movie that has those big musical moments but doesn't forget about the characters and telling a good story.
A Wicked that makes you think about your own biases, how you see the world.
That's the kind of adaptation that would truly defy gravity.
So while we wait for Act 2, keep those ideas in mind. The best adaptations don't just recreate what we already love, they make us see it in a new way, surprise us, inspire us.
And that's what makes these deep dives so fun. There's always more to uncover, different ways to see things, new possibilities. So until next time, dear listener, keep thinking about all this and keep diving deep.